Module 3, why are you evicting a tenant? There are many possible reasons why would we need to be able to evict a tenant. The most common one is that they didn't pay rent, whether this is a residential property or a commercial property. In this case, for a residential property, we would use the 7-day pay or quit. For a commercial property, we would use the 5-day pay or quit. You can only use the 5-day pay or quit for commercial properties. Another reason why we would need to evict a tenant is that there's a guest who refuses to leave the property. They haven't paid rent, they don't have a lease. This is the kind of person who is a guest of one of the tenants who is on the lease, who kind of lets a person come and crash at their place for an undisclosed amount of time, and they overstay their visit. If that's the case, we could serve what's called a 5-day tenancy at will. They have more people living in the property pursuant to the lease. So this person may be renting out a 5-bedroom house and renting out 4 of those bedrooms, trying to make up some kind of income. This is a pretty big no-no. A lot of landlords do not allow subleasing or subletting. You would use a 3-day nuisance in this situation. Maybe the tenant is committing waste on the property, meaning trash is taking over the front yard or the side yard or even the backyard. Again, that would be a 3-day nuisance. We see this with a lot of Section 8 properties, and we also see this with a lot of hoarding situations as well. Maybe the tenants are operating a business out of the dwelling. This one is kind of tricky to prove. As a landlord, especially if the landlord's in a different state, they're not driving by the property and checking on it. How a landlord would know is if they got some kind of notice from the city saying that, there's an illegal business being operated out of this house. Again, that would be a 3-day nuisance. Maybe tenants are a nuisance to other neighbors. You're getting calls from neighbors complaining, whether this is an apartment complex or maybe even houses next to your client or even your home that you're renting out. So that would constitute a 3-day nuisance. Police have been called multiple times to the property. That's a given. That's definitely going to be a nuisance. Maybe tenants have violated the controlled substance laws. Maybe you give a 24-hour notice to enter the property and you find drug paraphernalia in the house. Or one of the tenants says, yeah, my roommate, they get high all the time. That would constitute a 3-day nuisance. The tenant has violated their lease in some way. Maybe they're supposed to let the gardeners come to the backyard and in the front of the house, and the tenants do not allow access. That would be a 5-day lease violation. Or even if you get violations from the HOA saying that the tenants aren't following the rules and regulations of the HOA, that would be a 5-day lease violation as well. The thing with the lease violation is that this one can be fixed by the tenant. This one isn't really a guaranteed eviction. If the tenant brings proof that they have cured or fixed whatever the lease violation says, then the judge will dismiss the case and no eviction will be granted. Maybe the landlord just doesn't have a reason and they just want their tenant gone. For this kind of situation, we would serve a 30-day no-cause notice. You can serve a 7-day no-cause notice, but this is only for weeklies. So the 30-day no-cause notice can only be served if the tenant is on a month-to-month lease or their lease has expired and they've turned into a month-to-month. So in this case, we would give a 30-day no-cause notice, which leads us to the tenant's lease expired. So you could give the 30-day no-cause notice 30 days before the lease expires, or if the lease expires and you've given the tenant a 30-day notice, your own 30-day notice, which is a little different than a no-cause notice. This is a very informal notice telling your tenant, hey, listen, we're not renewing the lease with you. And you do this 30 days prior to the lease expiring, that can work too, as long as you don't accept payment after the lease expires. Once the lease expires and you take that next rental period of rent, they then turn into a month-to-month tenancy, and you have to serve a formal 30-day no-cause notice. So, and that has to be done by a licensed process server, the constable, or an agent of an attorney, which we'll get to in our next modules here in a little bit. So when the tenant's lease expires and you gave your informal 30-day notice that you're not renewing their lease, you could just serve a 5-day unlawful detainer, telling them that, you know, you're here unlawfully now. We gave you 30 days notice, and we gave you a heads up, and that's how we go about when the lease expires for a tenant. And that concludes Module 3.